Morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Working Group meeting. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Just a reminder that today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And just a reminder to please keep comments professional and respectful today. And if you need any technical assistance at any point during the meeting, please send a chat to Inteller Events, the host. To ask questions during the meeting today, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right, and then you can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, or if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making a comment. And you can also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists or to myself, Christina Guimera. This here is a visual representation of where we are in the stakeholder process. We're here with the arrows pointing at the beginning of the proposal development stage. Today's agenda will include one, reviewing our goals for today, followed by a recap of the last problem statement conversation by Jimmy. And then we'll have a couple of stakeholder presentations, beginning with Ben from the Department of Market Monitoring, followed by John from Portland General Electric. And then we will continue discussing the problem statement information with Juan, and then Juan will discuss initiative prioritization update and upcoming thematic areas before we wrap up with next steps. So with that, I'll turn things over to Juan.
Thanks, Christina. And just, can I get a thumbs up? You can still hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, everybody, for giving us a part of your morning. We're coming here to really continue the progress of this working group and hopefully get to the end of our first thematic area, which is the performance evaluation methodology. Is a very foundational topic, which is why we started with it. So I just wanted to give us this slide as a recurring thing for us to continue tracking progress. We've framed and we've level set in this policy area. We've had some really good discussions and comments from our stakeholders on the different issue or challenge areas that we've identified. And we're currently in progress of two things, right? We're currently in progress of the problem statements themselves. I do want to highlight again from our first meeting, a piece of feedback we got on the working group is really, let's capture the spirit of the problem, let's identify the issue, and then we can kind of move on. I think we've done a really good job of that. We really appreciate stakeholders' comments on the problem statements we brought in. We're also kind of taking a little bit of a deeper look at those problem statements. We're starting to do that assessment, kind of validate those problem statements as represented. Again, not so much from a semantical point of view, but more from is it capturing the issue or challenge that's been identified by this community so that it can be considered further down the process as we get to that resolving of the issue, the resolution, or policy development. And that's going to be based on the working group's progress and the discussion, especially with a very broad working group like we have here. We have a lot of different themes. So we'll move on to the next challenge area. And when we have those problem statements identified, we'll move forward into that resolving of those issues identified. So Christina, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So I think it's critically important, right? What is our goal for today? How should we shape our conversation? What lens should we be kind of viewing our time together this morning through? We do want to review what we've heard, and we want to finish that last conversation. So at our previous working group on the 7th, we clarified some key elements on telemetry and metering and the, I'm just going to lean into PEM, it's a little easier. And then we would like to reflect what we heard, what was reflected back to us via your stakeholder comments, and again, kind of drive towards that assessment of the problem statement and move forward in that discussion so we can start tackling some of the other items that are within the Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Working Group. We'd like to hear some stakeholder viewpoints on different PEM approaches. So we're going to have DMM present to us. So Ben Dawson has joined us, thank you, and he'll be presenting. We'll also then turn it over to John Kitchen from Portland General to kind of provide the stakeholder viewpoint on PEM from a WIM participant perspective. We will then take those two presentations, and we're going to give ourselves a little bit of time to formulate some problem statements that may stem from those stakeholder presentations. We'll continue that discussion on, alternative methods of estimating performance, and we'll talk a little bit about, the device level measurement inclusion into baseline development. Then we want to cover a couple of next steps in the DDEMI working group. As many of you know, we did have a little bit of a different flavor to the roadmap prioritization exercise this year, in which we did talk a little bit about the initiatives that are currently in flight. So the 2025 roadmap is in essence being revised. So we appreciate this community's, reflecting their prioritization. I'm going to give a very brief update there and talk a little bit about what are the next themes that the DDEMI working group will explore. And I will give a couple of places where you can further engage to kind of get that update. So I'm not giving you the full policy initiative prioritization update. That will be part of our roadmap process. But I do want to highlight, the interplay of DDEMI and that new prioritization for 2025. So I'm looking forward to a good conversation here. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Christina. And with that, I will give the floor to James Bashara.
Jimmy, you might be muted if you're speaking.
Thanks a lot, Christina. Thanks, Juan. Just want to say thank you again also to Ben and John for your presentations in advance. We really appreciate your time, and this is really what we're seeking to flesh out here today as we finalize the problem statements, as Juan mentioned. So really just to kind of recap where we are and how far we've come to date. So I'll just kind of go over each of these problem statements because, stakeholders have sort of coalesced around these, and we feel these have been pretty well baked. So there's a good chance to sort of review it, take any last questions before we move on to the next parts of these problem statements and the next categories and themes upcoming that Juan will later touch on, as he mentioned. So problem statement 1, just to recap, full suite of currently offered methodologies is underutilized with heavy centralization in a single baseline methodology, i.e. day matching combined, which raises concerns on efficiency and accuracy performance evaluation. Problem statement 2, existing PEMS or performance evaluation methodologies such as the commonly used 5 and 10 and 10 and 10 approaches are not well suited for emerging DR participation whose frequent dispatching distorts baseline calculations. And problem statement 3 here, behind the meter device level measurement is not recognized for use in developing baselines for performance evaluation methodology options. Performance evaluations depend on energy management, i.e. load and gen, and don't recognize non-energy meter technologies, contributions to load reduction calculation equivalents. As mentioned, most stakeholders are in agreement with these problem statements here and should move forward with them. Maybe go on to the next couple slides before taking any questions. So again, problem statement 4 here, which most stakeholders seem to agree on, whether tariff or BPM is most appropriate to house the PEMS and how that delineation would work. So really, to spell it out, CAISO's limited flexibility in adjusting details beyond its core baseline methodologies framework without tariff changes restricts the ability to keep pace with the evolving market needs. I think that sums it up nicely with the issue with keeping them in the tariff and not the BPM. And then lastly here, the next slide for the problem statements. The requirement for a control group end users to be registered in the DR system limits use of non-participating end users within a control group and is in conflict with consumer data privacy rules. So here, we've had a little bit of a varying of stakeholder feedback and whether we should move forward with this problem statement. So maybe it's a good spot here to stop for questions on anything we've covered from Christina to Juan to these problem statements. We'll give a a second or two for hands.
I'm not seeing any hands raised at this moment, but just a reminder to everyone that if you want to raise your hand, on the bottom right corner, you can use the raise hand function. We just received a hand by Colin Smith.
Thanks. This is Colin Smith from LEAP. Going back to the first set of 3 problem statements that were agreed upon, and then specifically that first problem statement 1 about underutilization of baselines. I'm still a little confused about the second part of that problem statement about concerns that this has around accuracy or efficiency. Maybe this is something that the Department of Market Monitoring will talk about in their presentation, but I think that's something that I'm still a little bit unclear on about exactly what that's referring to.
Thanks, Colin. Can we go up to the previous slide? Slide before this one, I think. So you're focusing on the first one, you said, Colin? So the latter half of that sentence, which raises concerns on the efficiency and accuracy and performance evaluation, you think we can get more specific with that? You think that's unclear, or what exactly, if you don't mind, just kind of reiterating your thoughts?
I think I'm just unclear if that means that we're concerned that devices are using baselines that don't accurately measure them, what efficiency concerns are we talking about here? I just think, like, you know, maybe this has been addressed and everyone else is aware, and I missed in the last meeting, but it doesn't fully, it leaves questions in my mind about exactly what problem we are addressing with this problem statement.
Thanks, Colin. It's Juan here, and sorry, Jimmy, just to jump in, you know, Ben is going to be giving a little bit of a presentation, which may, you know, kind of indirectly cover this. But Ben, I don't know if you want to, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving a little bit of color there, and we can save the rest for your presentation.
If we may, could we just hold off till the presentation? And we're looking to have a larger discussion around these sorts of questions during my presentation. So maybe just best wait till then.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Ben. Colin, is that fair? I think let's hold that question and let's raise it again at the end of Ben's presentation. We might be able to have a little bit of a deeper dive with some of the context he has there. Yeah, sorry, Jimmy, go ahead.
No, yeah, thanks, Juan. Thanks a lot, Ben. Yeah, we'll hold that. That's a good idea, Ben, to hold that question until we come across your presentation. So yeah, we want to be sure that these baselines appropriately capture the opportunity costs, right, for most efficient dispatch, but we'll get into that. So I think we had maybe, I think we need to go another couple of slides. There was another problem statement that I didn't get to. Sorry, folks, if the order was a little bit off there, but the next one after this one.
Yeah, thanks. Just real quick, I think, you know, a big part of it, and again, I don't want to steal too much of Ben's thunder, but at least my understanding, right, this has a lot more to do with ensuring a proper counterfactual in order to actually assess that performance. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to Kate, Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks, Juan. So this last problem statement here, the requirement for...
Do we just have
ahead.
a couple more questions in the queue before you continue?
Sure.
Next up, we have Kate Unger.
Hi, am I off mute?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, Jimmy, I think you wanted to go through all of them, but there were, I think, more questions on problem statements 1 through 3. I guess just in general, I would ask, I think that we and a number of other stakeholders addressed concerns with the focuses of these problem statements, and either problem statements stayed the same or changes were made to them that actually, I think, kind of make them less responsive to the issues of concern to us. So I guess the question would be, and I'll call out in particular problem statement 2, we were concerned about the way it was limiting the call out for exported energy for behind the meter batteries, and wanted that to be more broad, but the current wording actually has no reference to exported energy at all, and in fact, no longer even specifically calls out behind the meter batteries or EVs. So I guess the question is, are those issues in scope, or are they now out of scope for this? And if they're out of scope, are we envisioning future problem statements that would address the behind the meter battery issues that were raised in comments from the beginning of the stakeholder process, not only by CALSA, but by some other stakeholders?
Yeah, so thanks, Kate. So I don't want to jump the gun, but, rest assured, if you don't see your theme or category here that we've discussed previously, we do intend on covering all of them. I know we're focusing mostly on the PEM issues, right, and the problem statements here. Really, we're just trying to wrap these up. I think we felt as a team that what you're mentioning about exporting and how that works with RA, right? I think we're going to be discussing that in a future session, but I don't want to jump the gun since we'll be talking about that here at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, no, I think that's okay, Jimmy. And Kate, Juan here, thank you. I think that's a really good question. So one of the things we did, as Jimmy just mentioned, we do have that reflected. So the behind the meter batteries and exports is definitely an item that is in scope. We actually took this and edited it a little bit to broaden it, and perhaps we went a little too far in that direction, right? When we said emerging DR participation, we try to use that as kind of a broad bucket to capture it. I think you bring up a good point where, we perhaps could include the Rule 21 export language here. But that's simply to reassure that our editing of this problem statement was meant to be a little bit more encompassing of technology types that might be using these common approaches, inclusive of behind the meter batteries. And we will also be very much tackling the behind the meter export item within DDEMI. So let me know if you have any questions or further comments there.
I think you generally addressed the question, and of course there were not only exports but other issues. And I would say that I would reflect the concern that Colin called out about problem statement 1. So I think we just want to be assured that with these problem statements, the issues that we've identified in comments are being heard and will be issues that we can discuss, even though we are not necessarily seeing them clearly included in the problem statements as worded. And I appreciate what you're saying about making the problem statements broad, and I can certainly see that if we do that, then we open up the possibility to address different issues, and probably just want to be a little bit more explicit about that is the plan.
Absolutely. So I will verbally be very explicit that is the plan. And, we're chatting about it here. We're all in a conference room. I think it would be an easy edit for us to add a parentheses behind DR participation, perhaps get a little bit more explicit. We'll end it with an et cetera, right, to kind of keep it open-ended. But in essence, when you read problem statement number 2 and you see that participation kind of distillation of everything we had in the prior problem statement into DR participation, it was absolutely meant to be inclusive of all of those technology types. So I think that's something that we can definitely reflect in problem statement number 2, and we'll take that into account as we move forward into the next iteration of the discussion paper, Kate. So I appreciate you calling that out.
Yeah, thank you.
Not a problem. Yeah, sorry, Jimmy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I see another hand up from Jordan.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to just ask a quick question about problem statement number 5, which is about device level registration and the ability to register at the device level. I understand that this is, problem statement is primarily focused on PEMs, but I wanted to make sure that it was also reflected the enrollment barriers that were not just about, device level registration or barriers to that, but also the utility portals themselves, or sorry, I should say the portals themselves in terms of enrolling customers. There are difficulties associated with enrollment that are not specifically just related to whether or not devices themselves can enroll, but rather the process itself. And I wanted to understand whether or not this problem statement 5 was encompassing of that, or whether that would be addressed later on. Thanks.
Thanks. If you can go to problem statement 5 on the slides. I think it was the next one. And this is the one you're referring to, Jordan. And Jordan, if you don't mind, if you can announce which company you're with, appreciate it.
Sorry, Jordan Graham with Tesla. And it's understanding that, PDR, that customers are enrolled through utility portals using, customer information service requests form and the share my data process. And we have worries that this doesn't necessarily apply to device level registration for this, or device level enrollment. So I just want to make sure that this problem statement is encompassing not only of the ability to enroll devices, but also how those devices might be enrolled and whether the current processes for enrollment don't necessarily fit the device level enrollment.
Okay, thanks for that comment.
Jordan, I apologize. Would you mind kind of expanding on that? I'm sorry, maybe saying that again in a different way. My apologies. I want to have a good discussion on this one.
That's okay. So if you're looking to enroll at the device level, that there are processes that exist to basically share, meter level data. And if a customer is looking to enroll only a device, the question is whether or not they also need to share that meter data and go through the process that is currently required for that, which is the customer information service request form and the share my data process, which we've found to be, we think is difficult. And so I think it would be warranted to at least have an exploration about what that enrollment process looks like, separate from just whether or not devices you can enroll at the device level, but also what the enrollment process looks like as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Jill, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, yeah, I'm very confused. I thought we were on 1, 2, 3. I know we are opening up discussion on 4 or in 5. So are we on 5? Where's the 5 problem statement? Okay. Yeah, I think Jordan, what we are trying to capture here was the impact to the ISO. What you're bringing up with respect to the processes prior to our registration, we kind of put that off to the side to say, okay, so what is the problem statement for our registration process? Our registration requires it to be done at a location level, to be at the service account level. So that's why we've identified location, requirement, this type of requirement prevents aggregation of resources at the level of the customer device level. So that's, we're trying to capture within this problem statement what it is about the ISO process that's a problem. And I believe the other item that we recognize this prior process as being an issue of obtaining that. We heard that with our stakeholder presentation earlier on, how it affects customer enrollment. So this is trying to identify that, the registration process at the ISO, being at that service count level, has some barriers for those that are trying to aggregate at the customer device level. If you're not, if the aggregation is at the service account level, then there's no change that needs to be done. But if the aggregation is at the device level, then there's changes, there's a problem, and there's changes that might be needed within the registration process at the ISO. That's how you're trying to capture it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand, and I think that makes sense then. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jordan.
Next in the queue, we have a, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Christina.
I was just going to go to Yang Yu next. Yang, we received your comments in the chat, so let us know if you want us to read those or if you'd like to address them over the phone.
Thank you, Christina. This is Yang Yu from Sunrun. I think I just have a follow-up question for problem statement 5. We agree with what Jordan described, the existing barriers in the enrollment process with CAISO. We think, for example, if you look at problem statement 3, we talk about behind the meter device level measurement. Once that is enabled, for example, behind meter battery, you don't need to rely on customer utility meter data to measure performance. And if that's the case, when we register our customer and the device with CAISO, we don't need the customer to share their utility meter data with us or with CAISO to establish performance. And so in that case, I think we need to make this problem statement 5 more broad to tackle, to basically revamp the enrollment process for certain type of devices. You don't need ask customer authorize their meter data. And so the enrollment process can be streamlined to capture more participation from behind meter DERs.
Yeah, and thank you for that response. And that's exactly, we have these two different problem statements, and that's what we had heard. One of the problem statements was really about performance measurement being recognized at a device level. So that's why we kind of split that out. This problem statement is trying to capture that secondary part of the overall barrier, which is allowance for registration at the device level such that you don't need to have it at the service account level. So that's these two somewhat work together, and even internally in our discussion, I keep having to kind of point that out. These two serve a very broader kind of barrier that was communicated to us by stakeholders. And, we're trying to capture it with the two.
So that's problem statement number 3 and 5 that Jill's referencing, right? With that device level being able to be utilized for the performance. And then this, and I think you touched on it, Yang, is specifically, the enrollment barriers. And I'm hearing from you, we should address it a little bit more broadly.
And I do want to point out the reason why we've used this language from developing resources at the level of the customer device. Because if you start trying to broaden that, then you're back to a service account registration. Mm-hmm. So what you're implying to us is the fact that you have a specific customer device that you're aggregating and you wish to just register that and aggregate that and participate with that type of aggregation. Are we hearing that correctly, or? I think
that is correct. I guess we just want to be assured that, once behind meter device level measurement is enabled, we don't need to ask customer to authorize the utility meter, because that is one of the major barrier in the existing enrollment process.
Right.
Yang.
Thank you.
Next in the queue, we have a hand raised by Kimaya Abro.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. This is a quick question or comment, I suppose, on problem statement number 2.
And I'm sorry, could you say what
Yes, of course.
organization you're
Kimaya
from?
Abreu with Voltus.
Thank you.
Sure. So I think problem statement 2, and this goes back to the discussion with Kate, has this language on emerging DR participation, and that covers some of the scope on BTM resources and exporting, issues on exporting being covered. And I know there was some discussion about bringing back some of that specific language. My comment is on whether emerging DR participation should really be DER participation to reflect that not all resource types necessarily need a baseline when we're talking about say pure net export, which could be measured on performance alone.
Okay, yeah, good comments, yes. In looking at that, and we're still, taking feedback on the, having potentially reinserting the very specific comment about export. And remember, this is a measurement of energy, so it would be a recognition of export for settlement of energy for those purposes. I really want to be very clear on this. This is an ISO performance measurement that used in the settlement of energy. The second one about DR participation, I think that's an interesting point, but I do want to, we've put this in very specifically because what we're talking about here are DR, demand response performance evaluation methods. If we do have other participation models, which we recognize distributed energy resource aggregations, and those do not use baseline methodologies. So when we're speaking to demand response and demand response participation models and how we evaluate those for performance to dispatch from an energy perspective, we are utilizing these performance evaluation methodologies, and it's very specific to demand response participation. So that's why we have this, clearly defined within this problem statement, because the problem is really specific to these performance terms.
Although there may be preclude
go ahead, Ansel.
Yeah, that doesn't, even though demand response sort of as a term to describe deviation of load from a baseline usual behavior, that doesn't preclude the export of individual parts of the aggregation to be measured in that energy measurement function based on the performance evaluation methodology.
Right,
so,
and I think that gets to the comments we heard on problem statement 2
earlier,
not representative of the export quantities.
But we have to leave it as demand response because it's describing a certain model based on deviation from baseline.
This is all reflective of a demand response participation model.
Correct, yeah, so to Kate's comments earlier and what we'll take back and kind of adding that parenthetical addition to problem statement 2, it is meant to be implied in that DR participation, the handling of exports and the performance evaluation for exports. I think that's something that we could probably take a deeper dive into solutions and assessing what might be needed in order to do that, but yeah.
Right, yeah, so this is the current construct, right, Kimaya, for how we handle DR through baseline registration measurements, things like that, as Ansel and Jill mentioned. So to the extent you don't feel it's captured, we'll definitely have more discussions, right, as we continue the themes and categories and explore the DER space.
Kimaya, we don't want to stop the conversation here. Like, that was just our initial response. Please feel free to continue and let us hear your reaction on that.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. I think in summary, I'm hearing that export language could be brought back, but conversations about methodologies for a broader DER type are just outside of scope for this problem statement, which is really about the DR participation model. So I'm happy to hold any further questions until we've had a little bit more discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that's a good summary, Kamea. If we can go back to problem statement number 5 really quick, just because we didn't really get to that before we took questions, but we already have a couple thoughts on that, so it's a good segue. So any more questions on this before moving on to the next section of our presentation? I do see we have a couple of chat questions as well.
Yeah, we just have one chat question. It's a comment. I can read it now. It's from Sabrina Soldavini. She said that she has to drop off in a moment, but she has MCE colleagues on that can address things further. MCE does not recommend moving forward with PS3 and 5 at this time, given the narrow focus on device level measurement and registration. As a load-serving entity currently operating as a demand response provider, MCE does not see the current requirements as a barrier to scaling enrollment. A focus on the device-level approach could introduce excess complexity and cost for the CAISO, market participants, and individual customers, and may lead to a lack of optimization at a single site, introducing confusion and the potential erosion of economic value of market participation, particularly at the account individual customer level. And we also received a comment from Sam Irvine saying if additional clarity is needed from MCE, I can speak to that on behalf of Sabrina. And we also do.
Sorry, Christina,
Yeah.
that was a long and really well thought out chat comment. Sam, I'd like to take you up on that and see if that kind of spurs some discussion. So if you would mind raising your hand, and then Jordan, I see your hand raised. We'll go to you next, but yeah, Sam, would love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit, and let's have a discussion around that. I
We're not
see
getting any
on
audio, Sam.
WebEx, you might be double muted, like via the headset, perhaps. All right, we'll let Sam troubleshoot that there. Jordan, why don't we go ahead to you, and let's go back to Sam here in a second.
I think I've got it working.
I think Sam just came up. I don't know.
Yep.
We can hear you. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Thanks for letting me juggle some tech issues. This is Sam Irvin from MCE. Thanks for the chance to provide some feedback and clarity. Yeah, ultimately, as Sabrina's comment indicated, MCE ultimately feels that device level registration will add a lot of complexity and potential customer confusion. We have a pathway in place for participating in the market. We have concerns that kind of trickle down to just also M&V and kind of this other conversation that's happening around baseline methodologies. As more devices are having to register, there's potential, we believe, for conflict among devices if they're being dispatched without communicating with each other. And one adding clarity is we think that a service level registration enables more transparency and data access as is, so that you can see what's really happening at the service level. So kind of in a nutshell, the device level would add complexity, make it more difficult for serving entities to coordinate with our customers, potentially create conflict among device dispatch strategies, and ultimately, I think, which is the ability to promote things like affordability, load shape and shift events, kind of on the whole.
Hey, Jordan, your audio is cutting out a little bit. So I'm not sure if folks were able to make that out, but I think what we heard was service level account registration is a little bit cleaner and not as complex as device level measurement. Is that sort of sum it up, your comments? Sorry about that. It was a little bit choppy with your audio.
Yeah, this is Sam, not Jordan, and that's accurate, yes.
Okay. Great, thanks for that input. All right, well, maybe we can go back really quick. I know the slides are a little bit out of order. We apologize. So problem statement 6, just to make sure we have a nice little segue until Ben's presentation. So if you can go to the slide, the previous slide.
We did actually have Jordan raise his hand again, if you wanted to go to him one more time before continuing.
Okay.
Thank you, Jordan Graham with Tesla again. I just wanted to check to see whether, a DER, performance methodology that does not include baselining and the further exploration of that is contemplated underneath these problem statements. I understand from your, previous statements that the problem statement number 2, explicitly is about baselining. I see problem statement number 3 and problem statement 4 as maybe providing some flexibility to explore, what it would look like to measure device level performance that does not include baselining. But I just wanted to double check that that is your intent and understanding as well. Thank you.
I think it still falls within a performance energy measurement. I know baseline gets kind of thrown in there along with performance energy measurement. So if you're saying if it device level, use of device level for measurement of the performance to a dispatch, I think we're on the same page. But this is all the measurement type conversation. This is all about measurement of demand response and how we go about doing that, potentially utilization of device level, maybe throwing out the baseline word. I know we have it in the title, but it's really about developing new performance energy measurements for demand response.
Thank you.
So that is part of, and incorporated within that problem statement.
Thanks. And I think we have some other hands raised, but it might be just folks that forgot to put them down. But if you still have a question, or I'm sorry, if you don't have a question, please be sure to lower your hand.
Oh, we shouldn't do that. Inteller will lower them when we continue to the next section. They're just old hands though.
Okay, great.
But I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, thanks, Christina. If we can go back just to the previous slide really quick, and then we can get on to Ben's presentation. So I know we touched on this, but just to go over it again, since it is the last one before the next section, again, requirement for control group end users to be registered, and the DR system limits the use of non-participating end users within a control group, which is in conflict with consumer data privacy rules. Again, we didn't really receive consensus on this one, so any last sort of comments before moving on to the next section, we'd appreciate it.
I'm not seeing any questions or comments coming in at this moment.
Great. Well, obviously, please feel free to insert any thoughts as we continue. But with that, again, we appreciate Ben's time from our DMM here to present. And with that, I will kindly toss it over to Ben.
Hey, Ben, if you don't mind, we had some really good stakeholder conversation there. Just one moment. I'd like to give the floor to Ansel to kind of talk a little bit about, we heard a lot on problem statement number 2, on DERs, and, I want to give the floor because he shared something that just kind of resonated. Ansel, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of put a bow on it, I think, the problem statement's related to performance evaluation methodology, and I think this gets to what Jill said in response to Kamea's comment earlier. The baseline, the idea of deviation from a baseline and how that is constructed based on these performance evaluation methodologies to produce a energy measurement, this is all within that capital D, capital R demand response construct. I think, so since we're in the PEM bucket of problem statements, we don't need to get into the discussion of our, as someone said earlier, sort of the pure export model, which is not demand response. That would fall into our FERC Order 2222 compliant distributed energy resource aggregation participation model. And so I think there may be a space to talk about refining that model in another bucket of, in the discussion paper perhaps, in a future meeting. So, you know, please reach out to us if you kind of have thoughts about this distinction or questions, but just wanted to clarify that. So, and again, to my earlier comment, you know, exports, if you will, by an individual element of an aggregation could still be something that we discuss incorporating into the demand response energy measurement relative to baseline behavior. I spoke to that at the last meeting and in our presentation to kind of eliminate that zeroing out of certain elements of the aggregation and how they are counted against the baseline. So that is not precluded, that discussion. I think we wanted to capture that part of it in problem statement 2, and I think we might consider refining that based on the comments we heard today. So I hope that was a helpful clarification.
I appreciate it. That definitely helped me, Ansel, and, you know, I'm hearing, you know, we can clarify that in problem statement 2, but also within the economic participation models, we are explicitly going to be addressing exports, and perhaps we can take some feedback and expanding the economic participation model theme. So, sorry, Jimmy, just it was just really good discussion. This is exactly what we want out of working group, so thank you to our stakeholders for this. Ben, without further ado, let's go ahead and give you the floor, and thanks for your patience.
Thank you. And if whoever's controlling the slides, thank you very much. Here we are. Okay, I'm Ben Dawson. I'm a senior economist with the Department of Market Monitoring here at the California ISO. And as we're in a state of problem statement formulation, we're interested in getting a little bit more feedback on baselines. And I know, given the previous conversation, we want to think through what a baseline means, but we've heard for additional baseline formulation from stakeholders that the ISO could develop, and we're looking to hone in on that. So really what we're hoping out of this brief conversation is a little bit of a better understanding of where the stakeholders are coming from, in hopes that we can bring your thoughts into this conversation now and then into the comment space following this meeting. If you'd go to the next slide, please. We thought it may be helpful to just give you a little bit of background on what DMM does in the demand response space. So from the 2020 Energy Storage and Distributed Energy Resources, or ESDR Phase 3, we received additional data from demand response participants. And then in 2024, PEDRIT, or Penalty Enhancements Demand Response Investigation and Tolling, created some further incentives for this information and data to be provided to the ISO and DMM. And in this data, we do get your baseline and load submitted from the scheduling coordinator. And so we have insights there. And DMM does go and recalculate baselines to compare the submissions that we're seeing. And then on top of the general like baseline and load data that we're getting from you, we also have an understanding of the portfolio composition of the resources, and this will include location amongst many other things. And then as standard, we also have bids and schedules by these resources. So as monitoring, this is the data that we ingest, and we look at the performance and issues of demand response in our market. And you go to the next slide, please. Not only do we do our general, yes.
Sorry to interrupt, this is Ansel. If you go to the previous slide, I just wanted to highlight something that you mentioned on the DR data includes segment. You mentioned that your team recalculates baselines to compare submissions. Can you just speak to that a little bit more, just to make sure our stakeholders kind of have a sense of how that works?
Sure. I'm going to keep it very high level, but what we do is, so baselines and load are submitted by the scheduling coordinators, and there's many kind of calculation methods out there. But what we do is we take the data that you're submitting by way of load, and then go compare the baseline that you've submitted against our recalculation of the baseline, And this is just a simple monitoring metric we use to see how well the use of baselines is aligning with the performance of these resources. It's a monitoring metric flag that is helpful for us to take a look at the performance of these resources.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, that's perfect. I just thought it was worthwhile to underline that, you know, the SC is using the baseline to produce the energy measurement, and then, but DMM also is able to do the same calculation to verify that, that measurement. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and then onto the next slide, this kind of segues nicely into not only are we doing market monitoring, but annually we've been producing a demand response issues and performances report. And this is one of our high level, high line figures that we put out, which is how is demand response during high load days doing vis-a-vis scheduling against what their RA obligations are. And we're not saying that they should be scheduled up to their RA obligations, but this is a helpful metric for us to better understand the utilization of demand response resources in the market. And in high load days in 2024, we see that demand response utilization in the energy market is relatively low. And if you'd like further information, linked in the bottom right corner is the issues and performances report. You can turn to that. And something that we take away from this is the low utilization of demand response is something that would be worthwhile for us to find improvements in the DDEMI space to further incentivize demand response resources into the energy market. If you'd go to the next slide, please. One of the aspects of the report that we look at is trying to make a comparison between what demand response providers' revenues, where the origination of their revenues may be coming from. And it's very clear to us in 2024 that demand response is receiving the vast majority of their revenues through capacity prices, as compared to trying to make an apples to apples comparison of what net energy market revenues are. So we're seeing that DRPs are receiving the majority of their revenue from capacity and quite little in comparison in the energy market. And you can see in 2024 versus 22 and 23 that the energy market revenues are a little bit lower. And this might be worth having a conversation about later. So we'll flag that, but all to say, what DMM is interested in doing is hopefully improving the DR model in hopes that we can see more of these resources showing up in the energy markets to assist us in the energy transition and reliability. Please, if anyone wants to jump in and interrupt, I'm happy to. I think the next slide actually could be a worthwhile place for us to do that. But next slide, please. This has been raised earlier in the problem statements. We can look at the baseline methodologies that are being used by the scheduling coordinators or DRPs, and there are 57 available baselines, but we see, as was brought up in the earlier problem statement, that the vast majority of demand response resources are using a day matching approach. And there are a few others that are being used, but there's a much larger suite of options that we would like to get a better understanding of why there is such an underutilization here. And this will come back to something that Colin from LEAP was asking about. And this might be a decent place to pause on it, or we could zoom through the next two slides. But the suite of options does include day matching, which is about 90%, 99% of utilization. But there are also weather matching and control group options. And one thing DMM would like to understand better is why those other two options are seemingly underutilized by way of how we're seeing this in the data. And this is my perspective. I have a background in econometrics or like PhD level economics statistics. And the options that are generally provided to the DRPs is a pretty good universe of options when it comes to trying to figure out the counterfactual that a policy is having on the response of an individual or whatever our subject of interest is. So in this case, it's a demand response resource. Day matching is using the same resource in time to compare against itself. And one of the curiosities that we have here, and this leads to what Colin was raising earlier about efficiency and accuracy, is if you're using a day matching approach, what you're doing is you're using previous data from that resource. And then when there is a DR event, we're going to difference against what has been calculated in your baseline, which is your historical consumption, against what your load looks like during that DR event. And just as a easy hypothetical here, imagine we're just thinking about air conditioning loads and you've had a string of cooler days. And then on the day in which you get called for a DR event, it's a much warmer day. Your baseline is going to be calculated from those cooler days. And then your load counterfactual will be different because think higher loads, higher prices, and that difference that we can take from your loads and your baselines may not be accurately represented in the previous baseline methodologies or the previous data that we're using in the day matching baseline. And so this is where we think that the additional options that are already offered, which include weather matching and control groups, may create a more accurate representation of what that resource could be doing on that day. Yeah, we can talk about this more at the end here, but given the suite of options, DMM does believe that the near universe of options is available in what is currently offered. And so we are cautioning or advising against jumping into immediately adding additional baselines before we can get a better understanding of why what currently exists is inadequate. And so this is one ask that we have of the market participants here is why are the current suite of options insufficient and where can we create improvements in what currently exists to have the outcomes that we're looking for. So maybe next slide, please. Here, just as a little bit of baseline discussion, maybe I'll open for questions in the next slide. But what we're seeing in our report is that on high demand days in the summer, about 70% of total demand response capacity is dispatched in the real time and performing as scheduled. So DMM would like to see improved performance and energy market utilization of these resources. And we think that what is currently offered could potentially be sufficient, and we would like, or I think, yeah, is potentially sufficient. So if we're going to be looking for additional baselines, we would like to understand why what is currently offered is insufficient. Yeah, so we're recommending the ISO improve existing baseline methodologies, and we'd like to hear from all of you how to encourage further DR participation in the energy markets. And with the 57 baselines that already exist, we are questioning a little bit if it's necessary to keep all of these baselines, given what we're trying to do is come up with a solid counterfactual for demand response resources to be compared against. And just looking over my notes really quickly, there has been some discussion around device level measurement. And even at the device level, it's important that we have a robust baseline to compare against. You could think of kind of an easy toy example here, where suppose it's a device level electric vehicle charger. There's typical patterns that we're going to be seeing in electric vehicle charging. And then if a DR event is called, we still need that counterfactual to be comparing against, even if it's at the device level. So the way in which baselines are formulated and could be improved is what we're looking for feedback here. If we could go to the next slide, please. And this is the last slide. We're looking to open up a conversation here about where baseline improvements could increase performance, as well as additional aspects of demand response, because we would like to see there be utilization of demand side resources in the market. So are there baseline improvements that could also encourage additional entry? or additional innovation models that the demand response providers can provide to the market and then increase their utilization in the energy market. So we would like to open a conversation with all of you, either here now live or in the comments, asking the question if the California ISO needs additional baselines. And if they do, we would also like to understand why the current baselines are insufficient. And along with that, get a better understanding of why control groups and weather matching are seemingly so underutilized, given that they, from an econometric perspective, are a pretty ideal method in which we can generate a baseline and then understand the treatment, let's call it, of the DR event for the particular resource. That's all I have, and hoping to open a conversation here. Going back to what Colin was talking about around problem statement 1 and the efficiency and accuracy of these methods. I teased at this a little bit when I was talking day matching previously, but the use of something like weather matching or control groups, we believe creates a more accurate counterfactual for the resources to be compared against. And we do understand there are hurdles in the control group methodology, but we're looking for a proper counterfactual here to increase energy market utilization and performance. Yep, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate your time, and I'll go ahead and open it up. I see Colin's hand, and you allude to the fact. I think we have heard a call for exploring additional baselines and some of the challenges of control groups. I'll let Colin kind of expand on that. I would be very curious if anybody else wants to raise their hand behind Colin. I don't feel like we've heard very much on why the weather matching might be posing some challenges. So I'd be very curious to hear from the stakeholder community there. So Colin, I see your hand. Let's go ahead and unmute you there.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Colin from LEAP again. Going, I guess, maybe from the second question up. Thanks for your presentation, Ben, and for your, engaging in a discussion on this. You definitely raised some important questions, and we certainly agree that it would be better for demand response to have to increase participation in the energy markets. That's certainly a goal that we have over here at LEAP as well, and happy to work with you on developing approaches to improve that. On the question about why additional baselines are not used, I mean, control groups I think are not a mystery, right? PG&E gave a presentation on this in the first work meeting, or maybe the second meeting of this working group. It's more or less the subject of problem statement 6, but demand response providers, including utilities, just don't have access to non-participant data to build control groups. And so even though I'd say there's broad agreement that they're one of the most accurate baselines to use, they're just operationally infeasible to kind of act on at the moment. For weather matching, I wish I had a better answer here. I can definitely take this back to our operation team to understand why we don't use weather matching more often, but I can venture to guess that if a number of the same problems that occur with day matching might occur with weather matching, right? If you have an unusually hot day, kind of by definition, there's not too many recent days that you can match to in terms of weather. That said, I'm not as familiar with this baseline, so I'll defer discussion on that for the future, and happy to discuss offline with you as well. In terms of the first question, I think that in terms of well, starting with entry, I think that one really key element to highlight here is that this is connected to the device level measurement problem statements that we discussed earlier. I know we had some back and forth earlier about the importance of allowing device level measurement baselines in market performance, as well as some of the concerns about allowing those baselines to be used to evaluate performance in the markets. I just want to emphasize that one of the biggest barriers to entry for the wholesale markets right now, as we've heard a number of stakeholders on this call emphasize just a couple minutes ago, is the process of sharing meter level data with CAISO. And there's a strong understanding in the industry that device level measurements are enrollment processes that allow you to register devices directly, rather than having to do service level account registrations, could vastly expedite and expand enrollments in these programs. So that's one thing I would point to there, that problem statements 3 and especially problem statement 5, I think really do get to that question of how to increase entry in the markets for demand response. In terms of performance, I think problem statement, I think it was 2, gets to this a little bit. I think that if you want resources to be performing better, and especially if you want resources to be dispatching more often, participating in the energy markets more often, there needs to be some way to measure them without basically a way to do a energy measurement for performance without restricting their dispatch in order to maintain a baseline to use in sort of a day matching capacity. Basically, the concern about resources not being able to dispatch frequently under the current day matching baselines are a factor in hindering this sort of frequent participation. I'll pause here. So there's some background noise in my apartment. Sorry if that was disruptive, but I appreciate the opportunity to expand here.
No trouble.
I appreciate it, Colin, and your audio is
Juan.
clear. Oh, sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's really helpful, and we're of course tracking comments and everything. We understand that there are data limitations or issues with control groups, and this is something that we would like to further unpack. And supposing that there were better data sharing protocols in which would facilitate DRPs to use the control group methodology, is this something that would be looked at as an opportunity to move away from day matching? Because again, as you raised, one of the issues with day matching is if you're an EV charger and you potentially could be dispatched every day of the month, a control group would be able to facilitate that baseline for you, whereas day matching has the struggles that you've raised.
We would absolutely be interested in that. We also have a number of the same concerns as you do about day matching baselines, the ability to, or the way that they inhibit frequent dispatch, the challenges they have in actually comparing like to like when you're comparing to previous days that are not similar to the day of the dispatch itself. I think we have a lot of agreement there, and I'm happy to see some alignment on ways to move forward. Would love to talk to you more about ways to implement control groups in a broader capacity.
That would be great. And I am not going to speak for the ISO here, but if you could submit those in comments and DMM could see some thoughts there to help flesh this out, that would be useful.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Colin. Let's go ahead and go to John next. Claire, we'll go to you after that. And then Kevin, we do see your comment in the chat. We'll address that one after that. John, go ahead and unmute, please. John Kitchen.
Yep. Thanks, Juan. Yeah, I think I'm going to also kind of hit on some of this during my presentation as well, but I did want to go ahead and respond here. So I was just looking over the tariff again, and I think maybe there's some confusion as well, right? Because we talked about the baseline methodologies needing to be in the tariff, and when I look over the tariff, like I'm not seeing anything in the tariff about day matching, right? And so like I don't know if that falls under one of the methodologies, because like in the tariff, which is section 4.13.4, the PIMS for PDR and RDRR, it talks about 10 and 10, 5 and 10 meter generator output, weather matching. It talks about all those things, but it doesn't talk about like the day or. So anyways, I'm not entirely sure like how these fit into the tariff. Maybe it might be good to have a conversation or look into that, right? Because the presentation that Ben had showed like 57 different methodologies. I'm not sure where those 57 different methods. I'm not a baseline expert, and I'm not sure how those 57 different methodologies fall under the tariff.
Yeah, John, this is Jill. Yeah, you do highlight the day matching that's within the tariff, which is the 10 of 10 and then the 5 of 10. Those are under the umbrella of day matching. Now,
Okay,
when
understood.
when Ben, and it gets back to, there's really the three or four, I think Ben had it in his presentation. There's kind of a short list, but to get to the 57 number, this is when you are able to start combining the short-listed baselines within an aggregation. So I think that's the reference to the 57. But, you know, Ben has highlighted that short list, the day matching, weather matching, control group. We have meter generator output,
Load shift resource.
load chip PDR, load chip
And
resource,
EV supply
and EV supply. So those are kind of the short list. And then, so those are within the tariff, saying these are just different methodologies. Within the BPM, we kind of highlight that those can then be combined based on the type of aggregations that you might have. And you might have some residential that you're using five of the day matching with the 5-day day matching, which is more for residential, 10 of 10 for commercial customers that you have within your aggregation. It allows for that combination of an aggregation and the use of a more precise for those type of customer accounts. So that's kind of how we developed the main within the tariff, the flexibility to combine them within the BPMs, which gets to that number that Ben has highlighted of the 57 different types of baselines.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and just one other quick thought there as well. So one of the things I think that we were trying to do back a couple of years ago when we talked about our PDRs was we're trying to aggregate different programs. And one of the things I was going to talk about on one of my slides was like our C&I customers, our commercial and industrial customers. Even within our programs, they have an option of a couple different baseline methodologies within a program that they can choose, because our weather patterns and stuff in the greater Portland area are quite a bit different. And so even within a single program where we would look to actually aggregate the program together and not just like register each individual customer as like a PDR as an example, we would like to be able to aggregate and just say, hey, I've got this one C&I program. I would like to have this as a participating resource in the market. And the problem that we're having is there would be multiple baselines behind that program for those different customers. I think that's kind of the problem that we're running into. But one of the other things, Juan, I think that might be beneficial. I didn't realize that we were going to get into a deep or have this a deeper baseline conversation here. It might be good to maybe have a specific meeting set up for baselines, because I don't have our baseline expert here.
Oh, and that's okay. No, John, I appreciate that. We're addressing multiple kind of problem statements here, so I think that's fine. And
you know, John, I just want to address your comment of the desire to aggregate multiple programs together, and those programs may have different baselines being utilized for a subset of customers within that baseline, within that aggregation, sorry. And I think that's what we've, you know, have a precedence of recognizing, and that's to what I have talked about, where we have the short list, and then the much broader application of being able to utilize different types of baselines within an aggregation. So that precedence is set, you know, so just wanted to let you know that, you know, that is allowable under the current construct.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. All right, this is great discussion, but I'm keeping an eye on time. I want to make sure we can kind of keep everything in this conversation. Claire, let's go ahead and let's go to you, and then Kevin will address your comment in the chat, and we'll move on to Portland's presentation. So Claire, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. This is Claire School, the Power. Just on the comment of why weather match.
We are getting a bit of an echo from you.
Let me try unplugging everything. Is that better?
Still a bit of an echo. Are you joined on multiple devices maybe and mute on the other one?
No, only the one. I can just drop it in the chat.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Claire. And then Kevin from Tesla puts down, of the 50 methods that you reference, which ones are, in your opinion, best suited to dispatchable behind-the-meter devices, for example, battery storage or bidirectional EV? Jill, do you want to?
Well, I think the question was to Ben, but I did want to recognize it in terms of how the ISO from a prior policy development, we did look specifically at behind-the-meter energy storage as well as behind-the-meter electric vehicles when we developed the options for meter generator output, as well as recognizing electric vehicles service, what is it?
Supply equipment.
Supply equipment, EVSE. So those were the ones that were developed through a stakeholder process, inclusive of, I think we had Tesla and others that were part of that. It did somewhat, as was Ansel had presented, MGO does exclude the export of energy, so I think that continues to be within our problem statement as to just an overall baseline methodology problem statement. But those were the ones that allowed for these to be somewhat identified specifically to their contribution to demand reduction or load reduction in a method that was best suited for them.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to just the entire service account.
The entire service account.
I understand that the question was addressed to me. Let me take that back and we'll see what we can include in comments. I don't feel it's my place to opine on the best versions.
Completely understood, Ben. We appreciate that. Just Carrie, we do see your comment in the chat. This is quoting Carrie here, Ben. This is a suggestion to Ben. While PDRs are modeled as supply-side resources, submitting bids, receiving awards, and clearing in the market like generators, their performance is still measured using a load-based baseline rather than a dispatch-following behavior. This creates a disconnect, especially for dispatchable behind-the-meter generation. We'd like to explore a dispatch-linked performance methodology for supply-side demand response that better aligns with how these resources participate in the market. I'm going to pause there. Thank you very much. That's Carrie from Black Hills. That's a great kind of comment. I'm going to pause there and just let that kind of marinate a little bit and see if anybody would like to jump in.
I will just say I read the comment too, and Carrie, that's spectacular. And to think about these larger disconnects and to blue sky potential solutions, I think this is exactly the environment that we're in at the moment in formulating problem statements and thinking about moving forward.
Did you have anything?
I think that's great. I think I just would, again, go back to the prior statement when we're talking about participation models that have been developed for those that are from a demand response participation, which again is looking at the reduction of load
against a baseline
versus dispatchable supply-side resource such as a DER aggregation to be measured. So we do have those two participation methodologies, both from the supply side. Again, demand response, even though it's on the supply side, was kind of a proxy gen kind of construct where it is really looking at a pseudo-gen based on load reduction and not necessarily generation.
Mhm.
However, the DER aggregation participation models are very specific to being a supply side, dispatchable, measured completely different, not within a baseline.
Right.
I think there's one big difference between the two as well. DER aggregation is something that's the measurement of both the load as well as the generation is occurring within the markets at all times. Demand response was developed in such a way that that its participation is really specific to, again, load reduction.
Mm-hmm.
So the load component of that is not being scheduled into the market. It's disconnected from what the load serving entity is scheduling into the market.
Right, it is being served, but on the load side,
Yes,
as is traditional,
yes,
if you will.
And so it's a much different construct than a dispatchable supply side resource.
Which, again, that's the 2222 compliant model that we have. DER aggregation is maybe more what Carrie is into.
Yeah, and we haven't gone into detail within our working group on what that entails.
Right.
And also the
Sounds like there's
additional,
a desire.
yeah, I think there is a desire maybe to have a little bit more education on what that provides versus what's provided under demand response participation model. One other clarifying is demand response is not a 24/7 supply side resource. It's just been into the market when it has the capability for load reduction. Versus a generating unit is a participating generating unit and is always within the market.
Very good, great discussion. I do unfortunately, we're gonna capture, we're gonna group up together internally here. I've been wanting to move away from a comments template after every session, but I think we're gonna need one. This is really good discussion, and we want that reflected. But we do need to leave a little bit of time for our next stakeholder presentation. Just really quick before I toss it over to you, Mr. Kitchen. Claire, I appreciate it on why CPower does not employ the weather matching. It's difficult getting the data, very long look back period of 90 days, and that you are also concerned about day matching. By definition, it did not dispatch on a non-dispatch day, so dispatch and a non-dispatch day are not similar, but have deemed day matching the best and most feasible available options. And I think that actually plugs in very nicely to what we're exploring in problem statement number 1, right, is the enhancement of those current baselines, so I appreciate that. Chris Santieri also adds that the PDR LSR includes a consumption model that actually increases load. That's a great call out, Chris, I appreciate that. And then Carrie.
Not scheduling load. It's just additional consumption.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then, Carrie, I appreciate your comment on DER aggregation, but the fact that behind the meter generation is not separately metered will definitely be exploring this a little bit more. And your comment on that dispatch link performance is definitely noted, and we'll definitely be discussing that a little bit more. So thank you very much. Great discussion, DDEMI stakeholder group. I really appreciate that. Mr. Kitchen, let's go ahead and queue you up. We did have a little flex time in our agenda. We've eaten into it a little bit, so let's give you the floor.
All good. I appreciate it, Mark. Or Juan, sorry, jeez. Thank you, Juan. So John Kitchen here, Portland General Electric. You go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Juan, or whoever's running the presentation. So the first thing that I wanted to hit on here was, I think this is one of the key things we did talk about, hit on earlier, was the whether or not the PEMS belongs in the tariff or the BPM. And so one of the comments during the previous meeting was a FERC ruling from 2010, which, you know, from just after the meeting, looked into it, dug into some things and thought about it a little bit more. So again, you know, the FERC ruling in 2010 was before EIM go live. During that time, all the programs were mainly under CAISO's BA for the most part. I put on here regulated by the California PUC, which may or may not be correct. I may have made some assumptions there. Anyways, my second main bullet there on the real-time market participants. So now that we're in EIM, we have, you know, a lot of different entities that are in different states under different LRAs, under different regional authorities, with different distinct jurisdictions and varied requirements. The third bullet point here is about the way that I see this, you know, baseline methodologies. I'm not a baseline methodology expert, but the way that I kind of understand the basics of it is it's kind of a way to get to the point of we don't have a direct meter device there. And so it's kind of a way of metering it, right? So I'm thinking of this in terms of how this relates to what we would do with a traditional participating resource. How do we meter it? So I was comparing it to the metering section of the tariff. So the DR requirements, so the DR portion of the tariff, which is section 4.13, compared to the tariff for the metering section of the tariff, which is section 10. The DR requirements in CAISO's tariff is actually quite a bit more specific and restrictive than the metering requirements, right? So like in the tariff, it has the specific baseline methodologies and stuff called out in the tariff. Whereas if you look in the metering section, it actually splits out CAISO's metered entities vice SCMEs, scheduling coordinator metering entities. Also, the AIM entities fall under the SCMEs. And, you know, SCMEs have their own agreement with CAISO under the settlements quality meter data. Basically, we submit a plan to CAISO that states, hey, these are the meters that we're using, these are the calculations, these are the one lines. This is basically our plan for how we're going to come up with settlements quality meter data for each one of our resources. And it's not necessarily a specific requirement in the tariff outline for SCMEs for a traditional participating resource. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those main things around that FERC ruling. And so the bottom section there, kind of just wanted to just reiterate that, you know, PGE, we kind of believe that the interpretation of this could be reassessed, you know, with options including potentially resubmitting to FERC with justifying the new context of now having the EIM expanded, and now also not just EIM, but also you're expanding the day-ahead market, and or the second bullet point there, looking at you know, adjusting the DR requirements to the similar to what you have the metering section of the tariff. So that's kind of my main points there around the question of whether the PIMs belong in the tariff or the BPM. So I don't know if you want to stop there, Juan, or if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. I'm open for either, if you wanted to stop for questions or if you want to go ahead and move on.
I appreciate that, John. We're kind of chewing on this a little bit. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, and we'll open it up for comments here in a little bit.
Okay, appreciate that. So next slide here, just kind of dug in a little bit more detail around the tariff, specifically around the metering requirements. So again, section 10 of the CAISO tariff. So 10.1 is just kind of the general provisions. There's again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a clear distinction between CAISO metered entities and SCMEs, which SCMEs is scheduling coordinator metering entities, which EIM entities fall under the scheduling coordinator metering entities. And then section 10.2.9 is the validation, estimation, and editing of meter data. So in my mind, this is what most closely correlates to what I would consider like baseline methodology, right? Like this is where the meat and potatoes is, how are we actually calculating what comes out of this resource? Whether it be a DR or whether it be an actual generator right? And so in this particular context, 10.2.9 is, you know, is the section that outlines a regular generator. And so for this, for, you know, for WEIM entities or SCMEs, we again come to an SQMD plan. So, you know, as you're, as you at the CAISO are very much aware, we have the NRI process. When we onboard these resources, we register them with you guys. There are multiple different pieces of that process. And then one of those includes the SQMD plan, and that includes the details of basically how we're going to meter this site and get the data of the performance data of basically how this resource is performing. And so that is an agreement that actually occurs outside of the tariff, right? The tariff doesn't specify exactly how we're going to do that. It doesn't specify what types of meters we use or those calculations. We have, you know, we have certain standards of meters that we do use, certain requirements that we have with our LRA and everything else. And we come to that, you know, we use that equipment, and we also come to you with the best practice calculations and everything else. And then we come to an agreement with that, and that's done outside of the tariff. So anyways, that's kind of a bit in this slide. If you would go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is the core of, I think, what PG would really love to is some sort of a new participation model, whether it's a type of an NGR or something similar to that, where we could be able to represent our demand response resources within the market from a EIM entity perspective. This would allow for current and future programs to receive RSE credit and be responsive to price signals. So some of the key points on here, which kind of already talked about a little bit. What I would and PGE would like to see is some sort of, be able to come up to with some sort of a formal agreement for WEIM entities that is kind of matches our traditional processes for traditional participating resources, right? And again, just thinking about that process, we have an NRI process that we register the resource with CAISO. There's multiple steps through that, and then the SQMD plan would be the equivalent of coming up with some sort of a baseline methodology agreement with CAISO. So that's kind of what I would kind of envision this for a WEIM entity, is for our different programs that we have, is that we would be able to come to CAISO and say, hey, I've got this new awesome program. I've got, you know, I heard several different vendors on here, Tesla, various different people. Maybe Tesla comes up and we have a Tesla system on our, and we say, hey, we've got Tesla, we want to aggregate, we want to create a program for Tesla on our system, you know, start an NRI process for that, and then create a baseline, and you'll come up with some sort of SQMD plan, or that comes up with a baseline methodology for them, and be able to come up with an, within that, you know, outside of the tariff for a WEIM entity. You know, the second main bullet point on there is having the functionality to be able to scale the individual DR programs. And I reading this, I realize I didn't word this very cleanly now, but one of the things is, you know, these programs are growing and changing as on a daily basis, right? We have customers signing up for residential thermostats and a variety of programs on a daily basis. And so as a WEIM entity, we need the flexibility to be able to scale these programs and not necessarily have to come back and do a registration or changes every time, you know, a customer signs up, or if we lose a customer off of one of the programs or something like that. Ideally, we would also like to get to the point where we could aggregate programs to greater than 10 megawatts without having telemetry. because from a WEIM perspective, you know, we're outside of the CAISO footprint. And we would like to be able to just more simply, we would like to be able to bring these resources to the into the market. And if we can't aggregate more than 10 megawatts, what's going to happen realistically is we're just going to have a bunch of 9 megawatt programs. And then you know, and then that's just going to be more base schedules, more bids and stuff that we have to submit and manage. You know, not saying that it's a deal breaker, but it just makes it a lot easier for us if we could just say, hey, we've got you know, we've got a 100 megawatt program. I would like to that we can't really get real-time telemetry for. We would like to be able to treat it as one program rather than having to break it down into, like, say 10, 12 programs to keep it all below 10 megawatts. You know, and then also the operational flexibility. Obviously, I believe you guys are already know around the dynamic variability and stuff around how the DRs are performing. They're not going to be flat throughout the hour, and they're gonna you know, they're gonna perform differently. And then the last two bullets here are stuff are items that we've talked about in the past. So you know, one of the existing problems that we've had today was a lack of feedback into our load forecast. So when we have a DR event today, even if when we do report it and it is adjusted in the load forecast, I think has been better lately. But the load forecast or our real-time load is submitted into, you know, your guys' system, and then there's a sharp dip in our load, in our real-time load, that the forecast may not necessarily have a corresponding reasoning behind. And so just having something in place to implement it there, to be able to recognize that, hey, there was actually an event that happened here. And so I know that we talked about having that implemented. I think you guys were working on that. I don't know where you're at with that, but you know, one of the thoughts there was taking our forecast for a DR event and using that as like pseudo telemetry or logical telemetry during that time for an event. And then the last bullet there is something as well, to be able to perhaps provide WEIM entities to have the ability to make manual adjustments to the DR forecast, because as it stands today, once we make an event call, like, it's pretty much done. We can't make any sort of changes, even if we recognize that, like, let's just say we had an all call event on our 7 programs and like one of them failed. We have no way of making an adjustment to that DR event today with CAISO. So it'd be nice if we could do something, you know, like in BayOp today, we have the ability to go in there and make an adjustment to our forecast. That's just something that I kind of think might be something similar to you know, we might be able to implement something like that. We go ahead and go to the next slide.
So John, while you go to the next slide, you know, I think you alluded to it, we are working on implementing some of that automation to that DR adjustment process. So, sorry, go ahead.
You're fine. Yeah, feel free to stop, and if you're prepared for questions or want to, you know, elaborate on anything, feel free. This is kind of the last slide I have before I get into start going through our specific program details. So if you want to elaborate on anything, feel free. So this is kind of like a potential interim solution that we had, right? So one of the things that we're struggling with today is the process for us is very manual. So, you know, basically we're just using the LFA, the load forecast adjustment methodology, which is basically we send an email to your forecasting team. They make the determination of whether it warrants making an adjustment to the load forecast or not. So we have to then wait for an email back based on their response. We take, if they do make an adjustment, we take a different set of actions. Then if they don't make an adjustment, then we take a different set of actions. And it's a very manual process, and it's not something that our operators do on a daily basis. So like every time every season we do a DR event, we have to like retrain our operators. So it'd be nice if we could get to the point where we had something where we could schedule these like we do a regular resource. So that's where I was at here was, in the meantime, if we can't get to a point where we can generate or create a participating resource, it would be nice if we could create just a non-participating resource where we could at least just schedule them through our automated processes. We could still maintain the same level of requirements, having the attestation that we provided for the LFA or whatever those requirements may be or may need to be. And then still would like to see the the last two bullets, which were basically the same as the previous two, the getting the feedback into ALFs, into the load forecasting, and then also potentially having the option for our BAOs to be able to make a manual adjustment after an event starts. So I'll pause there because I know that's probably a lot to unpack. So.
I appreciate that, John. And thank you very much for putting this presentation together. I want to open it up to the stakeholder community first. If there are any comments or questions or agreement to what John just covered, which really in my eyes is almost it's kind of three different items, right? But Brandon, go ahead. I see your hand.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so first off, thanks, John, for bringing this forward. Really appreciate it. I just wanted to say, this is Brandon Holmes with APS. I did just want to say, as a WEIM entity, we very much agree with what John is proposing here. I think it would just be very helpful to get, be able to represent our DR within the base schedule, recognizing that there are, telemetry challenges or limitations. So what he's showing here as the potential interim solution, we very much agree with. So thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon. John, one of the questions I have here is, could you unpack a little bit more? I saw it a couple of times here, inclusive of the third bullet here on kind of using a base schedule as logical telemetry back into ALFs. Can you kind of go a little bit more into what you're envisioning is logical telemetry, like what you're meaning when you have logical telemetry? We also had it back in some of the earlier slides as well. So I'll toss that back to you, and then I do want to reflect Carrie from Black Hills also in the chat there. John, very much agree with the base schedule representation. So yeah, but if you wouldn't mind, that's something I'm curious about.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so what's happening today is, ALFs is the load forecast system, right? So when we have, we've been working with CAISO over the years, so there's been a lot of improvements, and don't get me wrong, it's been way better than it has in the past. And so I haven't looked at it lately, and so it may be a lot better now. But, my comments here and the focus here has been on things that have occurred, a couple years ago. And so what we were seeing was basically, we would have a DR event of, say, about 100 megawatts, 90 to 100 megawatts, right? And so, and for PGE, you know, just correlation to everybody, you know, we're only around, like our peak load was like 4,500 megawatts. So 100 megawatts is pretty significant. It's not like CAISO's, you know, tens to whatever thousands of megawatts you guys have. That's, so 100 megawatts is actually fairly significant for us. And so we'd be cruising along and at, you know, let's say 4,200, 4,300 megawatts, and we have our DR event call, and all of a sudden our load, our real-time load, which gets submitted into ALFS, and so ALFS is a persistent load model, right? It would see our load just instantly drop 100 megawatts. And it has no correlating reason for why. Typically on a, you know, when you have a generator there in your EMS, your generator value would be fed back into a generation calc, and so you wouldn't have that load value drop on you. So DR is something that's happening behind the meter, and ALF sees that load drop and doesn't have a reason for it. And the persistence model of ALFs would actually see that 100 megawatts, which would be, you know, for us, that would be, you know, a couple % of our load. And then the persistence model would just keep tracking down and down, even though our load was actually going up, because it's seen that sharp drop in load. So what I was thinking there is our base schedule. So I know that there's several other folks on here as well that aren't EIM entities. So for us, our base schedule is basically our hourly schedule for that resource. So like if we had a, you know, I'm just saying Tesla because I know I heard them on here. Like just say we had a Tesla system on our, a Tesla DR on our system, and we scheduled Tesla, right? And let's just say we had 50 megawatts for the hour, we would just base schedule at 50 megawatts. So my thought there would be, that would be the forecast. There's not telemetry feeding back to ALFS directly, but we could take that scheduled 50 megawatts and send that back into ALFS. Since it lacks real-time telemetry, we could provide that as a logical telemetry, representing to ALFS saying, hey, when you see this 50 megawatt reduction, it's actually because there's a 50 megawatt DR program here. So we're just providing that. It's the representation as to why that load changed, so the persistence model doesn't try to chase it. And then the same thing when it returns, because when the load returns, we were experiencing the same thing, and just an opposite.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And we have John Rudolph from our short-term forecasting team. We've promoted him up to panelist here. So thanks, John Kitchen. John Rudolph, do you have, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in, and thanks, John, for that summary. John and I have emailed a few times on the short-term forecasting team because we handle the demand response process that he just walked through, and agree with some of the points that were made historically, how our demand process works. I think both from the CAISO short-term forecasting perspective and the WEM, we've wanted to find ways to improve the manual email process. And so I think we'll provide an update first, and then just to describe where we're at with automating some of the existing process, and then we can maybe keep going on some of the conversation on ways to keep improving that. But currently what we're working on is automating the existing email process using a new API service. So instead of WEM or EDAM entities sending an email to short-term forecasting and going through this manual evaluation process, there would be an API that the WEM or EDAM entities submit their demand response schedule for. And then the idea is that when ALFS receives that API submittal, it would automatically get passed into the load forecast. So there would be no longer this manual discretionary process. The API would pass it straight to the load forecast model, and the adjustment would flow through and be viewed as an adjustment that way. The API could also be updated in the event that the demand response schedule changes throughout the day. It could be submitted also days, more than one day in advance or current day at any time. So there's flexibility in when the API could handle the different submittals. And so I think that's a good status update on where we're at. The timing is I don't know if we can commit to when it's going to be released, other than I can say that it's currently in development by software engineering. Will not be available for this summer. Could be available by potentially EDAM Go Live. I think that's the target, is have it available for EDAM Go Live. So,
John.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'll pause there to see any other comments, but I do want to touch on a few other points that were brought up too.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Just another quick thought there too. So when you say it's going to automatically take our forecast through like an API and submit it, is there a threshold there, right? Because like today, basically, like what you guys are kind of manually looking for a threshold. Is it just going to take everything? So like, let's just say we had a small DR event that's only like 30 megawatts. Is it going to automatically incorporate it, or is it just going to? Is there like a threshold or something there?
Right, there's no threshold. So right now, technically in the BPM, there's supposed to be a 5% threshold. So if the DR event is over 5% of an entity's load, we're supposed to automatically incorporate it. If it's less than 5%, that's where the discretionary process is supposed to kick off. Pretty much all DR events we receive are less than 5% of an entity's load. And so that threshold that you're referring to, I think in the BPM, is going away.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then also really quick, so that was, eliminate the manual part of the process, I think, parts of the manual process. And then what about the like the feedback piece here? So like the second to last bullet around, where the persistence model, it sees the sharp change from a DR event, and then the persistence model tries to chase it.
Right.
We talked about the feed. Is that being corrected with this as well?
Yeah, so we have developed functionality in our load models to handle that. So okay. to avoid sort of the persistence, and they capture the DR event with the right signal, and they don't chase the movement and load. So there's the assumption there that the DR shows up and it follows the schedule. If you're in a situation where the DR doesn't show up as scheduled, then you can get some funny persistence behavior like you described. But in the situation where 100 megawatts of demand response is called for several hours and the schedule's followed exactly, then it performs as expected.
Okay, thank you for the update.
Yeah, and I think that I think what's helpful as part of this conversation is thinking what we might want to enhance as part of phase 2 development. So some of the things that I heard were adding program level detail and maybe some ability to provide actual data or estimates of actual or pseudo telemetry. I think those are things that we would want to think about as part of phase 2 development, because this API service that's being developed right now specifically to replace the email process could be expanded to include some of that other stuff that you described, and it could be helpful.
And if one wanted to find out more details of this, is that in the developers forum, or?
I believe that there is going to be a project to capture some of this stuff. It might not all go into one project. For example, submitting something like pseudo telemetry via an API may be part of a different project than doing program level DR program level detail. That might be in a different project, but I know that there are different projects in the works for addressing some of these different things in various stages. So maybe that's something that we can follow back up with in terms of making sure all the stakeholders are aware of the different projects where some of this stuff might be occurring.
Okay.
Well, thank you, John and John. I appreciate that. And this is this is really good discussion, I think in particular for, you know, one of our participation models on LFA, you know, tying it back to PEMS, you know, on that last slide, we talked a little bit about, in essence, kind of an SQMD plan or an equivalent agreement on the baseline. So I think really hitting two different participation models or two different DR topics here. And I appreciate you presenting this so far, John. I know you have I know you have some additional kind of information. I think the reason I wanted to pause is it hits PEM, but this is also kind of a really organic, this conversation we just had on LFA, a really organic kind of segue into what will be our next session, where I think we can definitely continue and dive a little bit deeper into some of the, you know, market representation around demand flexibility. So keeping an eye on time, we have about an hour left, so I think we're doing fine, John. I don't want you to, don't feel like you're on a hurried pace, but we're kind of right where we should be. I want to kind of toss it back to you so we can continue through your presentation here.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll go through it kind of quickly, I think. But I think it's still good to hit on a lot of these topics. If you feel like stopping and wanting to elaborate on anything, by all means, feel free. If you would go ahead and go to the next slide. So that was kind of my ask. I wanted to get that out of the way first because I kind of figured that we would kind of run into a lot of questions, which is great. I love all the questions and stuff. But I wanted to kind of shift into just saying like, hey, informing people of what PGE is in this field and like what we're bringing to the table with the DRs and like, you know, how they're shaped for us. And so anyways, we've got about 100 megawatts of DRs today, 107 in the most ideal conditions, right? Based on weather and different things like that. So we've got a total of 7 different programs, you know, across residential, multifamily, commercial, and industrial. About 24%, so almost a quarter of our residential households participate in one or more of our programs. And we are continuing to grow our programs. So this is something that, you know, PGE has taken stake to, and we have interest in growing our DR programs and keep them going. So we're looking at almost, you know, 10 megawatts, 9.6 additional megawatts expected this summer. So if you would go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Just kind of another breakdown. On the left there is kind of the color codes. So in the very light gray is residential. The darker gray is multifamily. The light blue is the small, medium commercial. And then the darkish blue is large C&I customers. And then in the very middle, up on the top there, you'll see that we actually have, so the 2 vertical sections, we have behavioral programs. So those are like manual DRs. And then on the far right, we actually have some direct load control. So we have a mixture of both. So we have 3 programs that are behavioral, peak time rebates and time of day. And then we also have our large C&I customers, some of them. So if you notice Schedule 26, which is in parentheses there, Energy Partner on Demand, Schedule 26 is actually in both sections for behavioral and direct load control. So some of them are actually manual and some of them are actually direct load control. So they're a little bit of both. And then also direct load control, you can see we have residential smart thermostats, smart charging, multifamily water heater, and then we have small and medium commercial thermostat programs as well. So those are our programs and kind of how they're split up. And again, just keeping in mind, some of them are behavioral, so it does take customer actions for them to actually show up and work. While some of them, actually more of them are direct load control, but there are some that are behavioral. So if you'd go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And this is a breakdown of how large these programs are in terms of megawatts and customers. So, you know, peak time rebates, these are again residential programs, asking customers to conserve during evening times and stuff. And we have, you know, PGE is just shy of 1 million customers. And we've got, you know, almost 150,000 customers enrolled in peak time rebates. Almost, you know, 54,000, almost 55,000 enrolled in thermostats, which is actually one of our largest. It is our largest, not one of. It is our largest program, is residential thermostats, providing us 44 megawatts there. And then working on growing our smart charging. We're almost up to 2 megawatts now. And then our next largest program is down there on the bottom right, and that'd be our energy partner. So again, that's our large C&I customers, 38 megawatts there, 140 customers. So that's a breakdown of the 6 largest programs. There's another one there that's that didn't provide me the details that we're working on growing. I think it's like a little over 1 megawatt right now, but anyways, that's where we are at with our customer programs in terms of their sizes. We would go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So again, I wanted to show this slide because, you know, I just wanted to reiterate that the DR stuff is important to us because PGE has a vision to grow these programs. So in this gray color on the bar charts are where we're currently at 2025 for each of the programs, and the orange is our targets are for 2030. So we are looking at growing every single one of these programs. So it's in our vision, it's part of PGE's goals to grow these programs. We call them WIGs, wildly important goals. There are companies' goals across the board for the entire company. These are in there for everybody. So they're not going away, and DRs are important for us. So we would go ahead and go to the next slide. I wanted to call this out. Challenging to explain all the particular details here, but basically our current process. So the different programs have different call options. Some of our programs are more flexible than others. As I mentioned in one of the previous slides, some of them are behavioral and manual processes where some of them are actually directly controlled. We have our teams are actively working to improve our programs for our customers, as well as from a grid operations perspective, or a grid services perspective, I should say. So we're continuously working to make improvements there, but there are limitations in what the programs can do and what our customers can provide per se, and what we can do through these programs. Currently, our programs offer a range of 3 different notification windows. So we have programs that have a 10-minute call option, 4-hour call option, and an 18-hour call option. So if we want to be able to get all of those 107 megawatts I mentioned earlier, we have to meet that 18-hour call option. So basically, the way that we're doing it today, we're doing it in the day-ahead time frame, and that's 18-hour notification to the customer. So basically, that means that we have to go into those systems before 18 hours, and the customers has to get those notifications within 18 hours. So really, it's like a 24-hour notification. Or you have to make the decision 24 hours in advance, basically. So we make it in the day-ahead time frame. We can provide, you know, up to the, I just put in there the sub bullet there, that if we use the 4-hour time frame, we can call the 4-hour programs as well as the 10-minute notification programs, and we can get about 60 megawatts there out of those programs. But to get the full 107 megawatts, we have to basically do a day ahead call. And also with that, those call options are a 3-hour time frame window. So when you start calling the peak time rebates and the residential thermostats and stuff, we don't really have the option to call them mid-hour or, you know, just say, oh, we want to call you for 30 minutes, right? So I know a lot of you are probably familiar with a lot of these programs and how they work, but just kind of want to iterate that these programs don't have a whole lot of flexibility in them per se. So for hours, we have two call options in the evenings. Basically, they can either start at 1600 or at 1700 and run for 3 hours. So from 16 to 1900 or 17 to 2000. Then in the winter, we also have a morning call option from 7 to 10. So those are for the all call options. We do have, again, for some of the programs with like the 10-minute notifications and 4-hour notifications, we have more flexibility there. But if we're getting if we're doing the all call options, it's a lot more rigid. So if we go ahead and go to the next slide, please. This is kind of starting to get into a little bit of our PIMS. I don't have a whole lot of the details here in terms of the methodology, but I did want to kind of hit on some of these topics. So we, you know, the day before we call the event, we have a forecast that we provide to CAISO. We do get feedback. So on the far right there, we've got the evaluated results, which we hire a third party to analyze the meter data. Those evaluated results feed back into our forecast. So we're always working on improving our forecasts and providing as accurate forecasts as we can. So we do have that feedback loop. And then in the middle there, we also have a post-event report from the DERMS platform that we receive. And those, you know, those performance metrics could be, or not could be, they are different for each of those 7 programs that we have. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And then this was just kind of a difference between, this was some event calls for 2023 of our forecast of just looking at the first hour compared to the preliminary results. So you can see there were actually a couple of events on there where our forecasts were like almost right on with the preliminary results, and a couple of times when they were a little short. Our forecast has always been kind of on the conservative side compared to our results. And if you go ahead and go to the next slide. And then this was just a breakdown of the different programs for the hourly forecast for the preliminary results. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And this was the average forecast. So the first one was just the first hour, and this is the average forecast compared to the preliminary results. It's a lot closer. It is still our forecast there in orange is still a little bit lower for some of the calls, but it is much closer. So we do actually, again, go back and provide our feedback and stuff, have a feedback loop into our forecast, and are constantly trying to make improvements there. And we would go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a data source basically for a few of our programs for, for the residential smart thermostat. We've got the preliminary and the evaluated. You can see the evaluated results are pretty much AMI meter data for all of them. And then the preliminary is a combination of either direct telemetry, the KYZ pulses, AMI meter, or planning values. So I'm not going to read through all of those. If you guys did want any of this information as well, Juan posted this presentation to the site as well. So go ahead and get to the next slide, please. And then this was a example of just Energy Partner, which is a large commercial and industrial program. So for summer, it's about a 40 megawatt program. Winter, it's about 30 megawatts. Customers, the second section there with the customer participation, you can see the notification window. So as I talked about earlier, we've got the time frames. This program has the 18-hour, 4-hour, and 10-minute notification windows. And then really at the bottom, the baseline and customer incentive settlements. So this is kind of what I was getting at earlier, where I was talking about Jill. So Katie shared this with me, and Katie, our expert in the DR world with these baseline methodologies. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join. But while I was talking to her about this, the data sources for our C&I customers are both AMI and KYZ pulses. For Energy Partner 26, which is a single DR program, each customer can actually sign up for a different baseline. So within that program, we can have one customer be a 5 of 10 with adjustment. We can have another customer be 5 of 10 with no adjustment. And then we can have another one be a firm service level. So within that one single program, we can actually have customers with 3 different baselines within the same program. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So this is where we get into some events and weather data. So I am going to try to put on a meteorologist hat here for a minute. So the large picture on the top left. So each one of these slides is a period of days. So this one is January 13th through the 16th. And what our meteorologist did for me was he picked the day that had the coldest temperatures. So the 2 pictures that you see on the top are actually, I'm sorry, the picture that you see on the top left there, the large one on the top left, he found that the coldest day, so winter, the coldest day, there are some for summer, it's going to be the hottest day. And the one on the left is actually the temperatures. So what you're seeing here is, if you look in the bar graph on the bottom, the colors are actually representative of actual temperatures. All the other graphs are temperature anomalies. So the large one on the right is the average temperature anomaly over the 4 days. So that meaning, what is your normal climatology for the area? So if you look in the central California area, how it's kind of yellow, that means that your guys' temperature was near climatology. It was maybe at 1 or 2 degrees higher than normal. Where in Portland, we were purple up in the Pacific Northwest there, meaning we were like lower, below normal temperatures ranges by like more than 15 degrees or so, according to that chart. So that's how you read these. I am not a meteorologist or an expert in meteorology, but I'll try my best here. So the reason why I brought these events up is because I just wanted to kind of share some of the anomalies that we have, right? Because I know that you guys have nice sunny weather all the time in California. We don't quite get that luxury in Oregon. We get a lot of different temperature anomalies. Two things that I wanted to share. There are some events where we have some temperature anomalies where it actually changes drastically. One, and two, there's actually differing conditions. There's actually a couple events in here where it's differing conditions where like it's cold in Oregon and hot in California or vice versa. And so like when prices are high, that kind of makes it difficult for DR programs. So anyways, just wanted to call some of those things out. So if you would go ahead and go to, so just taking a look at this chart here, and if you look at the bottom charts, they are temperature anomalies. So you can see for each day. So the top right is the average. The bottom four are the anomalies for each day. So you can see in day one, Oregon, the Pacific Northwest for PGE was purple for all 4 days. You can see California day one, Southern California was kind of blue, which means you guys were a little bit colder than normal. Northern California was a little bit warmer. Day two, California was warmer. 3 and 4. Day 3, you guys were warmer. Day 4, Southern California was a little warmer. Northern California was a little cooler. If you could go ahead and go to the next slide. So what we were looking at here was just a comparison to the CAISO Malin 15-minute market LMPs to just a PGE 15-minute market LMP prices. So for that first day in the evening, you can see that prices actually spiked up to $2,000. So we did make an event call during that day. But you can see that kind of the nuances of what we're trying to look for when we make these event calls. It gets very difficult because our customers have a perspective of, if you can go ahead and go to the next slide as well, Juan. So our customers have a perspective of, you know, they see, you know, this is another good picture. If you look at the top right one, where they're thinking about our current location in Portland. Like, hey, my weather's cold here. Why aren't you guys calling us? This particular event, we didn't call a DR event for this day. And the reason why we chose not to is because if you look at that chart, like it was cold in Portland, but most of California and the average there, Southern California was actually pretty warm on that day, warmer than like climatology. So the prices were actually subsided. And if you think about when we make these calls, we're looking in the day ahead time frame. So from the day ahead perspective, there's plenty of energy on the market. The prices were subsided. They weren't high. So we decided not to make the call. But our customers are kind of like, hey, it's cold out. Why aren't you guys calling us? So these are some of the things that we just deal with on the demand response side. If you would go ahead and go to the next slide, you can take a look at the prices from that day. So we actually made, you know, from a price standpoint, we made the good call option not to call them. They did spike up to $300 on the one day. But despite it being cold in Portland, the prices did not actually dictate that the prices, you know, weren't high enough to actually make that call. So in this particular case, the warm weather in California actually drove the prices of the market down, kept the prices of the market down. So we would go ahead and go to the next slide. So these are the two winter, the next ones are summer events. So if you look here, this is a 3-day event. So we've got one where it was actually really kind of hot in Oregon. So again, if you look at the top right, it's kind of the average temperature anomaly over the 3 days, and you can see how Oregon and above, above Oregon, north of Oregon is a darker red. We were actually, even though surface temp wise, I don't think we were much hotter, but like the anomaly wise from climatology, we were much higher than say parts of California through that event. And if you could go to the next slide, we could take a look at the prices really quick. And yeah, and surprisingly, we actually did not have very high pricing during that time period. But because it was high temperatures for our territory, our customers are thinking, we've got behavioral programs in place. Well, we've got a couple of different things that we're looking for. One is we've got the behavioral programs in place where our customers are thinking, hey, I want to participate. I want to help PGE. I'm enrolled in this program. It's going to be really hot for like a couple of days. Why is PGE not calling me, right? So we've got that perception from our customers. Another piece of this is, if we were to wait for prices to go high, we didn't have that many high price opportunities. If we wouldn't call these programs, we have what we call maintenance events. We wouldn't have the data to feed into our forecasts, to make our forecast better, to analyze our baseline methodologies and do all of these things. So we look at these days where we're going to have extreme weather, and even if the market prices aren't necessarily in it, we still may make the decision to call on the event just so we have the historical data. So we would go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so here's another example where it gets really hot. Specifically, like you can see how the dark kind of shaves out around Portland, up through like Seattle, and it was kind of the whole northern part there was red, but really like around Portland and Seattle on the top right chart there, you can see how it was really a dark red compared to, and when you look at the bottom charts over the days, the beginning, like the first couple of days, like the first day there, it really wasn't, it was pretty cool like in Southern California. The second and third day it starts warming up, but up in Oregon, it was in the Pacific Northwest, it was actually pretty warm. So if you could go ahead and go to the next slide, you can take a look at what the prices were during those times. Yeah, so for the first day there, even though it was hot for us, prices did actually in our territory, and PGEs, which again is the red, did not spike up, but the CAISO Malin 15-minute market spiked up to almost 500, and then on one of those days, and then got up to 1,000, and then 2,000 a couple of times, and then on the last day, our prices spiked up over 1,000. So just some interesting weather events there. We would go ahead and go to the next one. I think this might be the last one. Or the second to last. I think there's one more after this. Yeah, so this was just a one-day event where you can see we had a heat wave roll through our area in the northern portion where, climatology wise, it was hot for the Pacific Northwest, where it was cool for some areas of California, a little warm for Southern California, but not too hot. And if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. And then for this one, our prices were actually pretty low. Even the Malin price only was like less than $170 for a short period of time. So, and then last one. This was a kind of a weird one where what I was talking about with like the baseline methodologies and stuff as well, where you can see there are some, if you look on the bottom here, you can see there are some days like day 1 where a lot of Oregon is red, but where Portland is, we're kind of blue. The second day we turn, so blue meaning we're colder than normal. The second day we're turning like yellowish orange, meaning it's hotter. The same thing with the third day. And then the fourth day we're like a dark blue. And then the fifth day we're kind of, some parts of our area are yellow and some parts of it are blue. And so like these are just some, that's just like a really, really interesting like temperature anomaly weather condition that we had over a 5-day period, where we actually we're looking at a DR event during that time, where California was actually super hot during that time, but our temperatures and stuff were moderate. So if you could go ahead and go to the last slide there and take a look at those prices. Yeah, so on that last day there, you can see prices actually spiked up to $800, not just for the Malin, but also for PGE during several intervals there, and stayed above $500 for a good several hours during that time frame. So,
thank you, John. Really appreciate it. So let's open it up maybe for stakeholders and for the community if there are any questions. I want to read a couple of things that came in the chat. So I think I already reflected Carrie that she agrees with the base scheduling representation. We also have Helen Lowe from SMUD. You know, SMUD also generally agrees with PGE and the APS comments Brandon made earlier in the general direction of the PGE proposal. We think from the EIM-EDAM perspective, the framing makes a lot of sense and look forward to further unpacking this initial thoughts and as a starting point. And I think, yeah, as I mentioned, as we kind of get into the next theme, we're definitely going to start unpacking a couple of other things. But if there are any questions for John on his presentation, let's go ahead and turn it to the stakeholder community here. Please go ahead and raise your hand.
Any questions coming in at this moment?
Okay, John, the one question I have, right, when we're taking a look at some of those scenarios is and you know, we're plotting the Malin pricing. Am I understanding you that there's a concern sometimes in having this be price responsive? Is that kind of the main message when we're looking at those weather anomalies correlated to the Malin pricing?
yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I was thinking about that a second ago, that I should have elaborated on that. So yeah, when we were talking to our fellow counterparts at SMUD, you know, John Olson mentioned fuel limitation, calling it fuel limitation, which is a great way to put it, right? So in the event that we're, say for example, California is really, really hot and it's cold in Portland during, say, on a summer day, and prices are high, I can't call customer thermostat programs, right? Like, they're not going to respond, right? Like, if it's a cold day for me even if it's a summer day, and we have an abnormally cool, like, say we have like a moderate 70-degree day, and we adjust our thermostat programs, set our temperature, say from 77 to 75, and it's 70 degrees outside, you're going to get no response, right? So like, not only will the programs not show up, but from our customer perspective, our customers are you know, and not saying that this is anything that you guys need to work through or think about, but just thoughts for, you know, for the folks that are on here, when we're expanding this to a region wide and we have customers in Oregon responding to prices that are driven by California or driven by something somewhere else, if they're responding to like a thermostat program, our customers are thinking, or they're looking outside and are like, hey, it's not quite that hot outside today. Why are you triggering me? Why are you triggering my program today? Like, and you know, these are nothing for you guys to solve there, but that's just things that we have to think through. And so today, if we, what I'm getting at is we would not bid these in on a daily basis. If we would have, like they say, on summer days where the weather is moderate or cool, we would probably have to reassess what we can bid in, and they would not just be bid in on a regular basis, right? We would consider them fuel limited, or you know, whatever term or phrase you wanted to use there.
I appreciate that, John. That's really helpful. So I mean, in essence, when we tie it back together and tying it back to PEM, right? We talk about the LRA. We talk about an SCMD and kind of an agreement and the registration. So what I'm hearing is you would not want this as a daily bid in. And then the base schedule will not only help with load forecast if we were to tie it back, but it also gives you as, correct me if I'm wrong here, John Ansel, but like as an LSE, whose programs, these are part of your programs, it allows you the control to
When it's bid
when it's bid in.
Yeah.
In essence, that's it in a nutshell, John. Am I capturing you correctly?
Let me see if I can state it in a way, because we have been, I'm trying to understand too, and I thank you for that presentation. I think that was very telling to me in terms of that price that was being, and versus what that availability of the demand response. But I did want to kind of, so to me, when I'm thinking about this, I mean, you've presented an interim as a base schedule, but I think early on you also presented the potential for a supply side type, you know, method, but with adjustments. There's going to be some adjustments to accommodate certain aspects related to performance measurement, getting back to the performance measurement. And I like the way it was represented within your presentation. But I did want to kind of, one thing that came into my mind was, at first, you know, the demand side type bidding, which is one of our themes that are within the working group. That seems to me, the more you went on in the presentation, to kind of come off of the table, because it doesn't necessarily reflect a capability of having a demand responsiveness. Mm-hmm. So serve by load at a certain price, or, you know, serve it, you know, if it gets above a higher price, I'm going to reduce what that is. But it still does somewhat fit into a supply side type model. Mm-hmm. Maybe different, and again, we're going to be talking about this in other parts of our outside of the PEM discussion. Because discretion of when it's offered. Yes. Even though it's still price responsive, mm-hmm. but it does allow for it to be offered when, you know, when it's right. available. Mm-hmm. And at prices that may be formulated.
And I appreciate you did a much better way of verbalizing that. It's not about price responsiveness. It's about when the ability to control when it is offered.
When it is offered at a price.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
John, are we tracking with you?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think that there's, you know, some programs that don't have the flexibility to be bid in, you know, from that perspective. But I think that there are some that we do that have more flexibility that could be bid in, like we are looking at, you know, building out EV programs and things like that, and, you know, residential charging programs and stuff that have a lot more flexibility compared to, say, like residential thermostats and stuff that are a lot more rigid. So I think we have, you know, we do have some flexibility there with some programs, just not all of them. Today, we are, you know, we're doing the all call. And so we're doing the rigid approach rather than trying to split them up, because we don't really have a good way to do it yet. Just for simplicity, we're just gonna go down that route of we're just doing an all call and we're calling them for this 3-hour window, because we don't have a good way to really bid them in and do these different things yet. So that's what we're trying to figure out and work through.
Very good. Thank you, John. You have one. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say also, yeah, in terms of like the PIMS and stuff, like that was also part of one of my points too, is, you know, we were talking, you know, you were talking earlier about like the 5 and 10 and 10 and 10 day methodology. And I think, you know, when I was talking to Katie, again, I'm not the expert here, but she was saying that one of the reasons why we do use the 5 and 10 methodologies is because the last presentation, one of the last presentations there, how our temperature actually changed from hot to cold within like a 5-day period. We have a lot of temperature anomalies like that within our territory. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why we kind of have the preference to use that shorter term baseline methodology, just because we have a lot of variability in our region.
Yeah. Thank you, John. We do have one question from you in the chat, if you wouldn't mind. Can you please, this is TJ from the California Department of Water Resources. Could you please ask John to briefly talk about the technology mix of the C&I? Could those customers respond to shifting load instead of just providing demand reduction? And we might need to take that one offline because I think that's more kind of customer, yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, I think that like with the 10-minute notification programs, like we have some flexibility there where we can call them a lot faster. I don't remember off the top of my head, just because, as I mentioned earlier, like for simplicity purposes, we haven't really exercised that, I'll call it that muscle today, like where we just go and call those at will. So I have to refresh myself. I have to come back to that. I know we were looking at doing those sorts of programs in the future, but today we just haven't done that yet. And I can get more details from our team and maybe provide a response in a future meeting.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you. All right, Christina, do we have, and thank you again for, you know, this presentation and really highlighting, you know, your perspective on several items. And again, so it's a great segue into our next theme. So we'll definitely be continuing the discussion on a couple of points there. Christina, do we have any hands up or anything else in the chat?
I'm not seeing any other hands up or any questions into the chat this time.
Okay, very good. Well, let me take this moment to thank both Ben and John for giving us a part of their day and sharing their perspective and presenting in the working group. So thank you both very much. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Christina. So we can go ahead and skip this one. I think we had a lot of really good organic conversation during the presentations, and the team is going to really kind of come back and we'll give it some thought. I think we're also going to give it a little bit of thought how we can potentially queue this up in a comment template where stakeholders can provide us with their thoughts if there are any problem statements that need to be shifted or added based off of both of these presentations. But I wanted to take a moment because we got a couple of questions on this to give just a brief update on the initiative prioritization. I kind of signaled this at the beginning of the call. So the 2025 policy roadmap did ask for stakeholder feedback of current market design efforts, the DDEMI working group being one of them. So I wanted to, again, just at a high level, there is going to be a draft revised 2025 roadmap that will be discussed next week at our ISO Board of Governors and WM governing body session. There will also be a draft revised roadmap that will be discussed at the upcoming RIF meeting in 2 days on the 15th. So again, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. I'm not trying to give you the entirety of that update here, but I wanted to number one, thank the DDEMI community for representing, and also number two, give some assurances that you were well represented. So as you can see here, this working group received very high priority. So I know that we had some questions, centered around ensuring that we were well represented in this effort, and rest assured that we were. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So as it stands right now, we have our kind of revised roadmap for this working group, in essence, not being changed. We're still targeting that Q4. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This kind of brings us to our upcoming thematic areas that we would like to explore here. We talked a little bit, I kind of signaled a little bit during Portland's presentation here. So the next theme that we want to tackle is going to be enhancing demand flexibility market options. This covers that representation of demand-sponsored base schedules, utilization of NGR model by EIM entities, hydrogen electrolyzer participation, as well as, of course, open to new topics when we go into a theme, similar to what we did with PEM, right? We uncovered a couple of problem statements that were not part of initial conversations. That's exactly what we want in a working group, so stakeholders can have the direction of a working group or an initiative and what is the problem needing to be solved. Our next theme will then be our reliability-based demand response. So a couple of items that were reflected in comments in the roadmap. We have the, we have time. We have an elimination of the megawatt cap or change for exception criteria for RDRR, allowing RDRR bid options to utilize startup times, consider methods for having the fixed cost of an economic dispatch be in the economic dispatch decisions for RDRR, and allowing RDRR to reflect a minimum on time of greater than 1 hour. From there, we're going to move into the economic demand response. That's we've had requests for a holistic full refresh of the PDR programs. This is also inclusive of, creating a modified PDR for participants with behind-the-meter storage and those Rule 21 exports. So Kate and others, to the point on problem statement number 2 of PEM, I think we can reflect it in both and kind of address it in both respectively. Then we want to talk a little bit about expanding demand-side bidding options. This would be to talk about allowing participating load resources to bid demand into real-time markets. And finally, we want to talk about the distributed energy resource participation. So that's an extension of the DER program within WIM and EDAM, as well as continuing the exploration of behind-the-meter storage participation in wholesale markets. So we're going to allow this reprioritization effort to kind of inform I wanted to give you guys the teaser. We were very well represented. We received a high priority. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. We're going to allow that to inform us. So here are the next steps for this community. We will be coming together. We'll put a comment template together. I'm gonna ask for forgiveness if the community doesn't mind, and maybe we do kind of a quicker comment template just because we have a couple of key points really we want to capture from today. We'll put that out. We'll leverage that to update the discussion paper to kind of reflect the conversation holistically on PEM. From there, we're going to be moving on into the enhancing demand flexibility market options for our next working group session. If you are interested in presenting, please do not hesitate to reach out. And then pending that final revised 2025 roadmap, we will have it at the WEM governing body and ISO Board of Governors next week, also being discussed in the RIF in 2 days. That will then allow this team internally to map out that tentative schedule for the DWME working group, and we will publish that to the initiative page, and we will all be able to have a better idea of moving forward. We want to make sure we have, again, it's a broad umbrella that came under DWME, and we want to make sure that we tackle each and every theme. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Christina. And I apologize, Christina. I will go ahead and hand this off to you. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you so much, Juan. So all meeting materials and notices are available on the Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Working Group page. And if you have any questions at any point, you feel free to reach out to ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com, or you can email me directly at cguimera@CAISO.com. And now I just have a few announcements before we wrap up for today. Here you can see some of the meetings taking place at the ISO this week. And here you can see some trainings, market simulations, and business practice manual updates. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. And with, oh, I'm seeing a hand raised before we wrap up from Kamaya Abros.
Yeah, I'm just curious if in the list of upcoming thematic areas, if that represents roughly the order in which these topics will be scheduled once that, once roadmap prioritization is completed and the next several workshops are kind of scheduled out.
Yes, this is Ansel from the ISO. Kamaya, that is correct. And if you want further detail on some of these topic areas, the discussion paper has more about that. But this is the order that we are going to move through these problem statement discussions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kamaya. And I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Oh, we do have another question from Kate Unger. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, sorry, just a really quick question, and forgive me if this information is available and I just missed it. What is the date of the latest version of the discussion paper?
From the last.
I believe, I don't have the date handy when the most recent version was published.
But it was after the last working group.
Yes, I believe there was one published after the previous meeting that we had in April.
Okay, I've probably just missed that. I will look for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. And I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's discussion. And as a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. We thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.